I wish to call upon our first discussant, Dr. Willy Mutunga. Dr. Willy Mutunga is a familiar face in Kenya. He received his Bachelor of Laws degrees from the University of Nairobi and later on joined the University of Dar es Salaam for his Masters of Law. Dr. Mutunga then joined the Faculty of Law at the University of Nairobi as a lecturer and became the first indigenous Kenyan to teach constitutional law at the university level. While he was at the University of Nairobi as a lecturer between 1970 and 1980s, Dr. Mutunga was associated with the Marxist socialist ideologies and joined hands with a determined group of academics like Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Alamin Mazrui, who's around here today with us, Kamonji Wachira, and Maina wa Kinyati. I remember during our time when we were at the University of Nairobi, those was during the students' unrest. In one of those episodes, the GSU came to my room and they were looking for Karl Marx. Where is this Karl Marx? So while he was at the University of Nairobi, he formed, together with his colleagues, he formed the University Staff Union and later on became the General Secretary in 1979. Now, later on, Dr. Mutunga was arrested because of his, what we would say, the Marxist socialist ideologies. And by 1980, the University Union was actually banned. It was at that time when we were having what I would call decay in democracy in Kenya. So Dr. Mutunga went into exile in Canada after his release in October 1983. And it was while he was in Canada that he joined the Osgoode Hall Law School and achieved or obtained his doctorate of law. While pursuing his doctorate, he cooperated with other Kenyan exiles to launch the Kenya Human Rights Commission to further the struggle for socio-economic justice and a democratic constitutional order. Later on, after the collapse of the one-party state, and when Kenya adopted the multi-party ideology, he then came back, and by 13th May 2011, the Judicial Service Commission recommended him to be appointed as the Chief Justice, and the National Assembly of Kenya approved his appointment on 16th June 2011. He was later sworn into office on 20th June 2011. So apart from being a CJ of Kenya, he's also the President of the Supreme Court of Kenya. Dr. Mutunga.
Assalamu alaikum. Just to make a few corrections so that I sound better, and I never read law at the University of Nairobi. I read law in Dar es Salaam.
At where?
Dar es Salaam. And my professor is here, he saw me there.
Thanks for the correction.
And also, I never went into exile. I lost my job after I was detained, but when I came out, I had actually a very lucrative practice defending bank robbers for 5 years. And when my clients were all killed by 89, I went to Canada to study. So I was never in exile, but I just needed to correct that because I've seen it in Wikipedia and also Google, I think, right? Yeah. But let's me start by acknowledging what Pheroze Nowrojee, who is going to speak after me, has said about the Constitution, and that the Constitution, the 2010 Constitution, is a manifesto of the visions of freedom fighters, heroines and heroes, dead and living. And I want to briefly ask myself, in what way is the vision of Ali Mazrui, the freedom fighter, the hero and scholar, reflected in our 2010 Constitution? Now, needless to say, Ali Mazrui has written widely on a wide range of issues that are directly or indirectly relevant to the matters of the Constitution. And my conclusion is that, taken together, his views add up to a particular vision of constitutionalism anchored on the principles of inclusivity, fairness, and justice. And in my remarks, I would like to focus on 3 areas of Mazrui's ideas, areas that are linked to questions of identity. And what I'm going to say has been said, by my Professor Yash Ghai. But repetition is emphasis. I don't want to say what lawyers actually say. And I've seen, I've had this experience in court. Once I was arguing, before 3 judges, and one of them was asleep throughout the arguments. And when he woke up and the judgment was being delivered, he simply said that he had heard what his brothers had said, and he had nothing useful to add. I don't want to say that, so I need to say something, because I haven't been sleeping, I've been listening. The first of these is related to ethnicity. And for several years after independence, many of us advocated for a centrist government, partly in the belief that it would forge trans-ethnic unity. And in the process, we all remember, Majibo became a dirty word, and the mission of unity became a license for tyranny and the violation of fundamental rights of wananchi. Now, Mazrui, on the other hand, always held the view that ethnicity cannot be wished away in many of our societies in Africa, and instead of trying to sweep under the carpet as something unhealthy and dangerous, it ought to be addressed constitutionally. And towards this end, he rekindled the Majimbo debate in his short think piece entitled Majimboism, Economic, Political, and Military, that appeared in the local newspapers back in the mid-1980s. Expectedly, his views generated an intense debate, and some 20 years later, Kenyans had grown to appreciate Ali Mazrui's concerns, ultimately leading to the cardinal foundations of the new constitution, the principle of devolution, and that is the principle of equitable distribution of political power and resources. I think the principle of devolution, in my view, is one of the cornerstones of our progressive constitution. Those of us who are visiting counties that were marginalized, including mine, which is Kitui, whenever I go there, I'm pleased to see the little streams are being bridged. Kitui Township is now lit. The roads are graded. And so devolution, in my view, is it's a principle, or is a reform that cannot be reversed. I know we talk a lot about the MCAs and the governors wasting the money, but in my view, we should monitor how devolution is being implemented, instead of saying, it's not a good idea. The stories we hear from Marsabit, for example, Moyale and Wajir, are all very good stories about the resources going to the grassroots and the resources being moved from the center to the grassroots. So if in the county of Mombasa you have any problems, please don't start saying that your problem is because you have a Gikuyu president. You have a president next door who is a Muslim. He can't hide from you. So if you have problems, you have to go to His Excellency Hassan Joho and hold him accountable. I think that's the importance of the devolution as I see it. Not to mention that, in my view, devolution is also going to change our politics. The 47 governors are potential presidents, and the 62 senators are potential presidents. So it's good, isn't it, if we have about 200 presidential candidates, instead of having only 5, because we always have presidential candidates from the big 5, and I'm not talking about the animals, I'm talking about the 5 communities that control over 70% of the voting power. Now, another issue of constitutional concern to Mazrui, and which he raised back in 1986, if not earlier, is that of gender inequalities, and he argued that throughout Africa there's inadequate planning for the empowerment of women in the political process, and he made various suggestions, all based on what we have come to call affirmative action. He came up with 3 phases. Phase 1 was reserved seats for women in the legislature elected only by women, without prejudice to the rights of women as voters or candidates on the common electoral roll as well. And phase 2, reserved seats for women in the legislature elected by a franchise consisting of both men and women. And 3, abolition of special seats for women when the evidence showed a more balanced representation of men and women through a common electoral roll without the need of reserved seats. And if you look at the 2010 Constitution, the issue of gender equality and equity is central. We decided on the basis of the, the 2/3 gender principle, which, as you know, is being debated now. And when that matter came to the Supreme Court, my view was that 1/3 was the minimum, and that's where we wanted to start until we get to 50-50 or more than, or 60-40. But the majority decision was that the gender equity or one-third gender rule will be achieved, progressively, and I think the debates are still going on, and that's, in my view, another aspect of Mujomba's vision, the calling for affirmative action long time ago for women's representation in the legislative bodies, is very much the kind that has been adopted in the new constitution. The other issue of visionary importance raised by Mazrui is that of the language of the constitution. Mazrui always believed that the constitution that exists entirely in the imperial language, English, necessarily creates a major linguistic gap between the constitution and the citizens. And that delays development of a constitutional culture in the country. The majority of Kenyans do not think constitutionally, partly because the constitution speaks to them in a foreign language. And this concern of Ali Mazrui has finally led to a more recent efforts to have the constitution made available in Kiswahili. Now, added to this is the fact that Article 159 of the Constitution now calls for the promotion of African or the traditional justice systems of dispute resolution. Now, those elders who will be hearing these cases will not be conducting the proceedings in English. It's most likely be in Kiswahili, Kidigo, Kigiriama, Kikamba, Kikuyu. And there is a body of knowledge which I support, which basically says that the Constitution needs to be translated in Kiswahili first and then in these other languages, and that way we will enrich our jurisprudence. The last thing, I think Yash has talked about this, is what Mujomba Ali called the sex code and the constitutional order. And his argument was that constitutionalism is not about relations between families and genders, perennial and vital as these are, nor is constitutionalism only about political participation and ethnic accommodation, crucial as these dimensions have to be considered. Constitutionalism is also about the limits of state power in the lives of private individuals. And he said, they say, an English home is his castle, ready to be defended by him even against all unwarranted officialdom. And under what circumstances is an African home his kraal, ready to be defended by him even against state intrusion? Constitutionalism is therefore also about curbing of the state power from intruding too far into the private life of the individual. And he then went on to say, controversial as he always was, that if a man and a woman decide to live in sin and never get married, a democratic government and a free society should not interfere even if they disapprove of the sinful lifestyle. And what he asked, which is, beyond what the Constitution has even dealt with, is a question, what about living together as homosexuals? Obviously, very, very, very controversial, but I had to read it because it's in print. So here is a man who could anticipate even disputes that might come, 50 years from now when we are dead and buried. So the last thing I want to say is, and this is the conclusion, that these and other examples reaffirm my and many people's belief that Mazrui was a visionary who was well ahead of his time. The unfolding of events in the last decade or so have demonstrated how correct he was in his views about the Constitution in Kenya. In a sense, then, the referendum that brought 2010 Constitution into being was also a celebration of Ali's Mazrui's thoughts and ideas. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, Daktari. And I also want to thank you for the correction. So I wanted to thank our CV for our CJ for the correction. I remember during the East African community, we had what we are calling the centers of excellence, and anybody who wanted to do law had to go to the University of Dar es Salaam. And if you wanted to do medicine, you go to Makerere, and if you wanted to do engineering, you go to the University of Nairobi.